Hi, everybody. This is Sophie Hansen, the Political Director for NASW Massachusetts. I'm going to wait a couple minutes to see if anyone else wants to join us, but this is the webinar on public hearings and testifying, and we're going to start in just a minute, but this will provide an overview about public hearings in Massachusetts and testifying, although you're welcome to use this for other levels of office, and if you happen to be somebody that's watching from another chapter in another state, since this will be recorded and archived on our website. I believe that a lot of this that we're going to go over would be applicable for that as well. So for anyone who joins us and would like to ask questions, there is a chat, and I would be making the volume controls available to you as well. Otherwise, we will go through, and then should there be questions later on, we can post that to the website as well. So we will go ahead and get started. So this is the agenda for today. We will do a brief overview of our state government here in Massachusetts, a little bit about the committees and procedure, just so that you can understand how things work and the bills move in Massachusetts legislature. Of course, an overview of public hearings, how to prepare your testimony, ways you can take action, and then we can answer any questions that participants may have. Okay, so Massachusetts state government overview. So we're very lucky that we're similar to the federal government in that we have three branches. The first is the executive branch, which is the governor and all of the executive agencies that he oversees. We have the legislative branch, which we call the legislature, and it's bicameral. We have the Senate, which is comprised of 40 members, and the House of Representatives, which is 160 members. So if you're looking at Massachusetts as a map, you will see that it's broken up into 40 Senate districts, so they're a little bit larger because it's fewer people. That needs to represent the same amount of people. And the House of Representatives broke it up into 160 districts. And both the Senate and House of Representative districts are made up and determined by density of population. So after the census and we redistrict, those can change depending on the population in those districts. And then, of course, our third branch is the judicial branch, which is our Supreme Judicial Court. And our legislative sessions, we would like to note, are 18 months formal, although it's 2 years total, and the rest of the months are informal. So our next session at the time of this webinar will start on January 2nd, 2019, and will continue until July 31st, 2020. And then the remaining months from August to December are an informal session, which bills do pass, but they're typically non-controversial municipal bills, kind of granting paid or sick time leave banks, things like that, and there's no formal hearings or input from the public. However, you can always meet with your legislators to talk about a bill that you are very passionate about and asking what the possibility of those bills passing in informal session are. However, some bills, again, that are controversial don't typically get passed in informal because unlike formal sessions where you're taking a vote, in an informal session, it only takes one person to object to that bill for it to be killed for that session and then can be refiled in the next session. So for our purposes, when we talk about the Massachusetts legislature and lobbying in terms of testifying, we really focus here on the legislative branch and the legislature in terms of changing their opinion and asking them to support or oppose a bill. So going a little bit more in depth onto the Massachusetts state legislature, there are 26 joint committees, and 10 of those are, and 18 standing, which there are 10 that are just for House of Representatives and 8 for the Senate. So when you're thinking about committees and you have 26 joint, that means that you have representatives from both the House and the Senate in those committees. Now, these committees are arranged by topics of the bill. So there are topics like children, families, and persons with disabilities, elder affairs, ethics, etc. So when a bill is filed, the first place it needs to go to is a committee to be heard by these representatives and has an opportunity to hear from the public. So again, if there's a bill about, mandated reporting or child welfare, it's going to go to children, families, and persons with disabilities, and that's its first stop. You can always find a full list of all of these committees, including which representatives and senators are the chairs and co-chairs and sit on these committees, which is very helpful when you are asking them to make an opinion. You want to be targeting your testimony and your comments to the right legislators that are on those committees. And you can find that on our state legislative website, which is www.malegislature.gov. Okay, so how does a bill even get to a public hearing? So of course the bill must be filed, and typically how this works is that somebody sees a gap in needs or services, or alternatively sees something and says, wow, I can't believe we don't regulate that, or that's still happening, and they have this idea saying that, well, that should be a law. So there's a problem, and a potential solution that could be solved legislatively is now identified. We know that there's always strength in numbers, so then an individual, whether it's by themselves or they're part of an organization, will garner outside interest and then get strength in numbers in terms of advocacy. Now, of course, we're just activists. We think this is something that should happen, but we need someone in the State House to actually go ahead and file that bill for you. So that's when the conversations start to find out who is going to be your sponsor in the House and who's going to be your sponsor in the Senate, because you need to find somebody who will be able to actually file it and carry it through in those 18 months in the State House. So once the bill is actually been filed, you can start your advocacy. So it happens both inside and outside the State House. Inside, you have your House or your Senate sponsor, or both, is going to be seeking co-sponsorship from their colleagues in each branch. It's really important for the legislators to get co-sponsors on board early, because the more co-sponsors you have in the beginning, it's going to be a lot easier to pass your bill later on down the line, because no one's going to really vote against their own bill. So it's really important that they start seeking co-sponsors from their colleagues early. Now, outside of the State House as activists, we can't rely on legislators to do everything for us. So that's when membership organizations like NASW is going to encourage their members to call their legislators to co-sponsor and support the bill. Of course, legislators have taken and chosen to be in this role because they want to support the needs and wants of their constituents that they represent. So it's really important that legislators hear from you directly, the constituents, so that they know what bills are important for their constituencies. So we'll ask our members to call their legislators to co-sponsor support the bill, especially if you are a constituent of a legislator who happens to be in leadership or another position that can potentially move the bill forward or more quickly. And then, of course, another important piece of advocacy and why we're here and what we're going to be talking about today are public hearings. So a little bit about public hearings. So the reason we have it is it's in our Massachusetts Constitution. It is required that every single bill that's filed must have a public hearing to garner input from the public about whether this bill should be passed or if it should be killed. So as I said before, once the bill is filed and they have sought co-sponsorships, it is sent to a committee and a day is scheduled for it to actually be heard. And again, depending on the content of the bill, it's going to be going to different types of committees. Now, here you can see a picture of me. I am testifying on a mandated reporter bill last year in 2017, and this was the Committee on Children, Families, and Disabilities. And you can kind of see the folks here around the table. So these are all of the representatives and senators that have been assigned or placed on the committee. Now, it's important to note that the chairs of the committee are present the entire time. And we'll talk a little bit about how long the committees are, but they are there for the entire time, and any person who wants to testify must be able to testify. So they will stay the entire time to ensure that they hear from every single person. So this hearing does not end until they hear from every single person. And we'll go over how you can actually be present to testify. But the other members of the committee may come and go. You might see their aides come in with some water or some food, depending on the hearing room that they are in, but they are present and are able to hear all the testimony. Now, it's important to note that an average of 6,000 bills are filed each session, and each one has to have a hearing. So some can take hours to get through. If it is in the beginning of a legislative session, like we're going to be entering in January of 2019, there's going to be a lot of bills. right? So an average of 6,000 bills are filed, and a lot of them may pertain to children and families, which I've been using as the example. So there might be 20 bills or more that is slated on the docket for that committee to hear that day. So that means if I'm going to testify on one bill, mine might be the 18th on the list, and it might be hours before I'm called if it's scheduled to start at 1 p.m. It depends on how controversial the other bills are, how many people show up to testify on those bills. But essentially, I just have to wait around and wait my turn. Because what can happen is there might be the fourth and fifth bill at the beginning is going to have many people who are testifying, and they are waiting to get through all of those folks. But then there could be 5 bills right after that where nobody's there testifying, and they get through them very quickly. So I usually will wait around until it is my turn and I'm called to be testifying, but they can take a long time. Sometimes if the bill is very controversial or they expect a lot of input, they might schedule a hearing separately for just that bill. And a good example is the opioid bill that Governor Baker had filed in the beginning of January of this year in 2018. That was a bill that had a lot of parts to it. They anticipated many people to show up, so they specifically had rented and set aside the largest room, and that was something that honestly I think went 7 hours because there were so many people. So it really depends on the content of the bill and when it can be heard. So again, like I said, everyone who wants to testify is allowed to do so. They can stay there until midnight. If there are people still standing up against the wall who want to testify, as long as you show up and you indicate your interest, you are able to do so. Okay, so again, giving testimony in person. A couple of tips and things that I talked about is you need to prepare to wait. So sometimes the hearing will say it's going to start at 1 p.m., but you may not actually be testifying until 3 p.m. Sometimes our colleagues and folks in the State House can kind of give us a small indication of when they think we'd be in there, if they know this is a bill that's been refiled. And that it might be controversial or not, but often you just kind of have to show up in advance to hope that you'll be called and can kind of guesstimate your time accordingly. So you are given 3 minutes to give testimony. Because there are so many people that want to testify and they're required to hear from every single person, 3 minutes is what is the time you're allotted. And I can tell you that it goes very quickly. So bringing along a written version of your testimony or note cards is helpful, but try not to read directly from your notes. Most of the time, legislators are really swayed and can be persuaded by personal experience and story, right? I think as clinicians and as social workers, when we meet with clients, we know that narrative is so powerful, and so if we can translate that to our testimony, it can really move legislators. But sometimes they will actually ask for a written version of your testimony, especially if what you shared was so moving. And so it's helpful to bring it along because then after you actually deliver it orally, you can give them a copy right then and there. And then, of course, like I said, using your passion or outrage, depending on what you are asking the legislators to do in terms of supporting or not supporting, can guide your testimony when you are presenting. Now, if it's not your job, like it is mine, to wait around to give testimony, you can always submit it written and actually email it or mail it to the State House. So 3 minutes of an oral presentation usually translates to a 1-page double-sided for written testimony. So it shouldn't be any longer than that. And usually the text in there is double-spaced. And on our webpage at naswma.org under the Advocacy tab, if you go to Action Center, you can actually see an example of the written testimony, which we'll go over in a little bit, but we give you a template to follow should you want to submit written testimony. So in the written testimony, you will always want to be sure you're addressing both chairs if it's a joint committee, so that means you'd be addressing the representative and the senator. If it's a committee that's standing, meaning it only has Senate members or only has House of Representatives, you want to address the chair in there, which again, you can find this all on our state legislature website, which will include the correct address. And again, written, you have the flexibility in terms of what you want to say, and you can revise it. You can include data if you would like to. Some legislators really like data to see if it can strengthen your case. If it doesn't really add much to your case, I'd say just leave it to the heart, and it really is a personal preference of the legislators if they think it's helpful or not. But that's your call in case, in terms of if you think it would be helpful or not. So here's the written testimony format, which I already said is on our webpage at NASW. But you'll see in the top corner here, the state representative and senator, you want them to be, having their first and their last name and chair. I'm just going to get my little pointer here, if I can get my spotlight pointer. Okay. So you want to do your first name, last name of the state representative or the senator, and then putting comma chair. You always want to put the name of the committee that you are writing to, Massachusetts State House, what room they're in, and then, of course, city and state, which, again, you can find all of this on our website. The date, and then you want to put in bold right up front so they can be anticipating what they're going to be reading is in support or opposition, and then the House bill or Senate bill, which is what HB and SB are, the number, and the bill title. Now, bill numbers can change pretty frequently, especially that every time it goes through a committee, if it moves forward or there's any changes made to the actual bill language, which it often is, it can go from House Bill 82 to the next committee to be House Bill 1004. So you don't need to keep track of all the House bills and Senate bills numbers. Part of that is my job when it's on our website, but on the MA Legislature website, you can actually track it, and the legislative aides will be able to know what you're talking about. So you don't need to get too hung up on it, but it's good to have as a reference. I usually start it with dear chairpersons, their name, and distinguished members of the joint committee. Again, if it's not joint, don't put joint, and then the name of the committee. And then you ask them, thank you for the opportunity to submit this, for your commitment to. It's always nice to thank them. Oftentimes, just like social work, it's a thankless job being an elected official. So you really do want to thank them for their time because they do think so thoughtfully and carefully about every bill that comes before them. So you do want to take that opportunity. And then you just go into a little brief introduction about yourself. Why are you writing? Who are you? Why did you decide that you are able to speak to this particular issue? Is there any experience? And it could be professional. It could also be personal. Maybe you're writing as a constituent. Maybe you live in that community that would be impacted. Just give a brief reason as to why you're writing. Then, again, restating if you are in support or opposition of the bill, because, again, they get so many written letters and emails for testimony about different positions, and the legislative aides do keep track of each one, so it's easy for them to kind of tally up, okay, we got 50 this week for support and 15 next week for opposition, so they can kind of gauge what the constituency of Massachusetts thinks about this particular proposal. Then you want to take the meat of the testimony to really give specific reasons on what moves you to testify. So again, using personal and professional experiences. Did you hear a story from a client that really moved you and you thought that this bill could really impact their life in a positive way, or would it make it a worse situation for them? And of course, at all times, be compliant with HIPAA to use de-identified stories of clients just like you would for a case study or anything that you might share in the public world in terms of client stories. And then, of course, you want to wrap it up, again, supporting or opposing this bill, kind of reinstating. It just helps them, again, to really get a clear understanding of what you're writing about. And then urging them to consider this bill for an unfavorable or favorable vote out of committee, which just basically means could this bill move forward or not in its path to becoming a law. And then I always put either your electronic or written signature, name, title, address, phone, or email, because oftentimes there might be something that you shared within your story or testimony that the legislator wants to follow up with you about. So it's important that you provide your contact information so that they can do so. So what happens after the hearing? So you've either came in and you provided it orally, you submitted written, now what happens? So committees will often make changes depending on the testimony heard, and like I said, anytime a change is made, new numbers accompany them. So bills can be reported out in a couple of ways. It could be favorable, which means it can continue on its path, which is often going to another committee. Unfavorably, which means that the bill is going to die in that committee, and that's it for the session. It cannot move forward. Or it could be a study order, which is known as sent to study, which is a quiet way to kill the bill. And then there's no action, which basically means that the bill languishes until the session is done. sometimes no action can happen when a legislator has filed a couple of different bills. One is really gaining momentum, or they realize that there's some major change that they need to make to the bill, but if it moves forward, it would almost get an unfavorable report, which can affect its possibility of being passed in the future. So they might ask the committee to just hold it and take no action so that it doesn't hurt its chances the next session when it's filed. So again, bills will continue to move from committee to committee depending on its content, and then if it passes enough muster to have all of these readings, it will be brought to the actual floor for both the House or the Senate to be taken up for a vote. Oops, sorry, 1 second. My computer was lagging. Okay. So I get this question a lot when I present this to different folks is, does my testimony really make a difference? Do they actually hear what I'm saying? Are they actually reading everything that I'm providing? And the short answer is yes. They do keep track of everything. Like I said, the legislative aides have to keep track of and tabs on the 6,000 pieces of legislation that's filed each session, and they do keep track of who is writing, who is taking the time out of their day to contact their legislators. So the longer answer is legislators come from so many different backgrounds. We have folks in the State House who were electricians, who were educators, who were lawyers, and we have a couple social workers who are entering the State House in January. So again, while we do have social workers in the State House, the majority of folks in there have not been clinical therapists. They don't know what's going on the ground. They don't understand the barriers that social workers as a profession face when we're trying to help our clients access, in community-based services or Section 8 housing vouchers. They don't understand all of the barriers. And so testimony is a way that you can provide your expertise as a social worker and how you see policies affecting your clients, and asking them that by passing this legislation or closing this loophole, how it would impact your clients and could actually help them. And so testimony is just one way to share those experiences with them, but really goes a long way, because it's not only the legislators sitting in those chairs that's hearing from you, it's everybody in that room. So at the same time, you're also changing public opinion. So it's really, really crucial that we have our voices at that table. So here's just a couple of short tidbits from our members who have testified and what they thought of it. So Deb Goldfarb, who is one of our co-chairs for the Criminal Justice Committee, wrote, "I always feel grateful for an opportunity to raise the voices of my clients, and testimony has given me that." Nikki Forey, who was one of our former chairs of our Substance Use Disorder Committee, said, "I testify because I owe it to my clients to speak up when they can't. As a social worker, I have unique knowledge and experience and deserve to be in that room when decisions are being made that affect the populations I work with." And then Deborah Beck, who is one of our members, very active members in terms of political and legislative advocacy, talked about how legislators were extremely interested, listened well, had good questions, and just called it an amazing opportunity that she would definitely do again. So these are directly from our members that really enjoyed being able to kind of shed light on the issues that social workers and our clients face, and really enjoyed testifying. So now, of course, I'm sure you've been sold on testifying at the State House, and you're just wondering, how can I get engaged? How can I bring my story to life? And so here's a couple ways you can do that. First and foremost, we have our Political Action for Candidate Election, which is lovingly known as our PACE Committee. This is our political arm, so it is a separate entity from our chapter, and it is made up of NASW members. And this is a committee that I and as a political director staff. We endorse candidates who are seeking political office in Massachusetts, and of course we endorse and look at ballot initiatives as well. And endorsements are so important because it really helps to build this relationship with our legislators, for them to know what social workers care about. We have a questionnaire and a whole process, but also for us to hold them accountable once they're in office and say, you had pledged to us that if we endorsed you, that you would put forth and support legislation that supports our profession and our clients. So it's also a really nice way to hold them accountable and ensure transparency in their voting records. Another place that folks can get involved is our Legislative Advocacy Committee. This is a group of social work members who has an interest in legislation, who helps us to form our legislative agenda that we do each 2-year legislative session, and assist me in tracking bills throughout the year. And I also ask them in terms of helping me to testify or contact their legislators if they live in a particular district. That could be helpful. And of course, we always have other shared interest groups that often interface with legislative advocacy. So we have the Criminal Justice Committee, we have the Children and Youth Group, Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder, School Social Work, Veterans and Families, and I often will, asking those shared interest groups for their opinions when I hear of bills that come up that are extremely important to get their input on, because I myself, as a clinical social worker, I've worked in many fields, but a lot of these fields I haven't, and so I do look to our members who are in that work every day to let me know if this is something that we should be supporting or that we shouldn't. I also offer a Legislative Action Network listserv, which is free, so you don't have to be a member to do this, but you can go onto our website at naswma.org and you can sign up for this listserv. I send no more than one email a week, sometimes less, about actions that you can take at home. So I might say, can you please call your legislator, ask them to co-sponsor or to support this bill. Usually it's a one-click process. So you just enter in your address and then it'll pop up and with your legislator's name, their phone number, their email, a script they'd like you to use. So I'm really trying to make it easy for you to get engaged and to be participating in this process. And then, of course, I'm trying to build a testimony speakers bureau. So I want you and your voice to be present in the State House and for legislators to hear your personal stories, the stories of your clients that are so important. And so I have a link that is available for you to fill out, which is a Google survey form that would just be you filling out your contact information, when you're typically available, how I can reach you, and the areas of expertise that you feel comfortable talking about. So maybe you work in a school setting or, hospice and elder issues. We get requests a lot from partnering organizations to testify on bills that may not even be on our legislative agenda, but that social workers are present at. And so I'm trying to build this bank of people that I can call on to help with that. So if you're interested, please feel free to email me or to call. You can also follow me on Twitter should you feel moved to. And that is all I have. So I'd like to open it up to questions if anyone has any. There's a little chat button on your computer if you want to use that. Otherwise, I will just give it a couple of minutes, but otherwise, please feel free to call or email me about anything that talked about. Again, this is going to be archived and posted on our website. We'll include it in our January e-news and other areas on our website. So if you joined a little bit late, this will be available, and you can share it with your colleagues and folks at your office. But thank you so much. I've also unmuted if anybody needs to talk to. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.